Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. We're going to do a quick review of the Spydiechef. But first, please follow the Instagram and like the Facebook page and subscribe. That helps out quite a bit. So let's go ahead and actually get into some size comparisons here. So here you go. Let's look at, let's say, 940. Similar, very similar blade. Overall blade length. Pretty much identical. Even in the cutting edge too. And in the handle, they're pretty much identical. Now let's look at an XM18, 3.5 inch. As you're gonna see, blade lengths are very similar. Cutting edges are very similar. Blade length on XM18 is taking a little bit longer. The handle is also a little bit longer. So overall, still very similar. Let's see. Let's do. Yeah, let's do. It's always sometimes interesting too. Which one is a good one to look at here? Here we're gonna look at a Strider S&G. Again, very similar overall blade length, similar handle length. And just for another, like a Spyderco size comparison, there is your Shaman. So blade length's very similar, handle length's very similar, if not exact. The cutting edge is quite a bit more on this one because it doesn't have the choil. But overall, very good reference. Let's do one more, and that's just going to be a Neon Zero Shiro. Kind of give you a different idea blade length wise. Very similar. So yes, the Spydiechef is about a 3.5 inch blade with about 3.5 inches of cutting edge. This has been used. You can kind of tell by the scuffs and the residue. I actually mainly use this as a food prep. It is a Spydiechef after all. And so that's kind of what it's designed for, is a folding kitchen knife. So I guess, and it's relatively smooth, but it's not meant to be like your normal super smooth action. You can reverse flick it if you really want to. I know a lot of people like the wire clip. It's good. It does work. It is not my favorite clip. Not even my favorite clip Spyderco makes, but it is a very good clip. I will point that out. It's definitely not like the worst clip you're gonna find. It's very useful. It holds the knife in position well. It is canted well too, as you can tell. That way it sits close to the edge of your pocket. Nice, very simplistic designs, but very specific and use-oriented designs. It is a relatively thin blade stock. I think I even say the Shaman, yeah, it's gonna be slightly, if you can tell, slightly thinner than the Shaman. Not by like a ton, but noticeable. But the reason behind that, and you can tell this is not a full flat grind, but this guy is going to be. So it's going to be this is probably when you're talking about slicing ability and cutting ability and performance, this is probably the best that Spyderco makes, flat out. No question. Relatively thin blades stock, and it's all full flat grind, so it's all from down here completely grind. From the beginning, there's no flat extending more down here. There's none of that. This is extremely good at slicing. Very thin behind the edge, if you can't tell. I mean, so I cut up 2 pounds of chicken, handled that just fine. I cut up lettuce, I cut up a bunch of stuff, and so in several different meals, avocados, all of that. It handled it perfectly, honestly. Probably better than I honestly thought it would. I wasn't entirely sure. The one complaint to have is kind of ironic. It is a Spyderco after all. And so the one thing I wish they would change, and it's a spider hole. I wish they didn't have a hole in the blade at all. Specifically for a food prep knife. If this was another Spyderco for a different reason, different purpose, that's different. But you're gonna get all types of crap in this blade. And so you're gonna have stuff get stuck in there, and then you don't want certain things to mix. So like if you're making a certain salad, you're not gonna want chicken with a certain seasoning on it or whatnot. Sorry, there's a helicopter going across. Anyways, besides the point, this does get in the way of that, where you do have to clean it out before you cut anything else, because you don't want you want your foods necessarily mixing depending on what you're making. And I know that's silly, it is a Spyderco, so you would think they would have a Spidey hole, but there are ways to get around not having a cutout like that in there. It's just it's a classic Spyderco element that necessarily didn't have to be in this particular, and probably shouldn't be in this particular knife they made. Handle is very good for food prep. In fact, one thing I always like to say is food prep knives and actually utilitarian knives are going to do one thing really well. And when that means you're going to hold the blade, and then when you cut, the blade is going to touch before your hand. It's going to be orientated in such a way where it's going to be pointed down. The blade is going to be the first thing to contact whatever you're cutting. And this does that well. And so it is designed very well for cutting food on a cutting board or whatnot, where the blade will touch before anything else. So you don't have to do your wrist weird. It just happens without you even having to necessarily think about it. And the blade shape is great at that. So the way it is just a full belly. So go from here, and then you just cut it. It continues to cut through whatever you're cutting. And on top of that, being LC 200N, very stain resistant with good edge retention. So it's gonna be probably around your like S35VN kind of ability, maybe a little bit less, very similar depending on heat treat. It does have the opportunity of being actually more than S35VN if you have a solid heat treat, but around that level of edge retention, with fantastic corrosion resistance. Because if you're cutting up vegetables or fruit or anything that's very watery, and meat too, if you're cutting any of those up, you're going to get water, and water that's a little salty, which actually will stain any blade with rust quicker than anything else. With liquid and salt and anything like that will stain any steel way quicker than just straight up water. And so it being that steel is great because you're not gonna have to worry about it rusting. And in fact, using this for food prep as much as I have, and taking it to the sink and other places like that, and washing it and somewhat drying it, not being too careful about it, there's not rust stain on this at all. And I've looked. I mean, you can look yourself, maybe, if my camera will focus, maybe one day. But yeah, you might be able to see a little bit better there. Like, there's not a hint of rust, even in that pivot right there. Not down here either. Not there. And so, and it's still pretty smooth. It didn't really take away from the smoothness. Now, it's not meant to be your drop shot action, and that's okay. It's not really meant for that. The cutout is nice. You can get your finger in there. But again, I don't really think that cutout in general is necessary. I feel like they went with I mean, again, a flipper would not be a good idea because then you cut and then you hit the flipper tab. So if they had actually engineered it in such a way where you could have a small flipper tab, and you see that gap right there, and able, like right there, there's nothing. I don't see why you couldn't have had a flipper tab be hidden in there, so you would still get the nice blade shape and be able to not worry about it hitting the cutting board before your actual cutting edge hits it, and you wouldn't have the hole you wouldn't have to deal with. So there are a few things where I look at it and I'm like, could have done that differently, could have done that better. And that's okay. I mean, every knife, no matter how good it is, has a weird design flaw where they chose something that different than what in some scenarios would have been a better design, and that's okay. One thing I find interesting is if this is a food prep knife, why the lanyard hole? I don't see a purpose for it. In fact, it almost takes priority over the clip. Like, what I would love to see is this clip mounted where that screw is. It would be deeper carry, it would look better, be more functional, and you don't really need a lanyard if you're cutting and preparing your food. In fact, you probably don't want it. You don't want the lanyard getting in your food, becoming an issue. It's just, I just think that's silly. But there's no nitpicks. That's a nitpick. Obviously, you don't have to have a lanyard, even with a lanyard hole, and that's only like a few inches, or not even an inch. That's like maybe a quarter of an inch where you can move the clip up. So it's not a huge deal. It's just something I find kind of odd. The only actual weird issue is the spider hole, but it's Spyderco, so they're gonna, like, it's kind of one of those things, like, they could have done it differently, and it would have been overall better. Not that it's a bad design, it's a great design for use. A lot of people have a problem with it because it is bland. It's a bland looking blade for the most part. Nothing really necessarily special about it. Well, that's all kind of the point. It's food prep. You don't need something super special. It's designed to pull out of your pocket, and then cut your vegetables, cut your tomatoes, cut your avocados, cut your banana, cut your chicken up, whatever it is, and do it without getting rust all over it and being easy to clean, while being relatively slim, which it is. It is relatively slim. It is slim in the blade, slim in the handle. And so to kind of put that in perspective, let's get a relatively thin design, like the 940, and kind of compare it. They are the same thickness. And that's awesome. Like, this and this are designed for two different things, but they're very similar in their overall profile, other than this part. But you want this a little bit taller of a blade so you can have a much thinner edge and a better cutting performance. That's something a lot of people don't sometimes understand, is just because it's taller and more material doesn't mean it's going to have more friction, be harder to actually use. But in this scenario, you're going to be actually added performance. Anyways, that's all for today. I'll see you guys in the next video.